First, DJI introduced us to the Mavic 3 and the Mavic 3 Cine. Then we got the Classic a little bit later. And now we've added yet another camera to the flagship drone. This is the Mavic 3 Pro. Now, if you've been following DJI, then you know that the Mavic 3 lineup has pretty much been the consumer and prosumer drone of choice when you want the highest quality in the most compact size. And with the release of the Mavic 3 Pro, we do have some camera spec upgrades as well as a new tele lens right there on the top. Now, when it comes to the main camera, which is the bottom one, the larger one, that is the 4/3-inch CMOS sensor camera from Hasselblad. That is the wide angle lens. The one thing that DJI did add on the new Mavic 3 Pro is this lens right there, which is another tele lens, which is a 1/1.3-inch CMOS sensor, up to 48 megapixel photos, and it's also equivalent to about a 70mm telephoto camera. And the third lens we have is this one right over here, which is a 1/2-inch CMOS sensor lens, equivalent to a 166mm telephoto camera. Now, if you originally purchased the Mavic 3 or the Mavic 3 Cine, that does have the 2 camera setup. And if you are using that telephoto lens, only then would you really know if you need to change your drone or change your camera setup because of this third lens. But if you haven't purchased one yet, and you do want that option, the great thing about the Mavic 3 Pro is that it's only about $150 more than the original Mavic 3. So if you haven't purchased a Mavic 3, you're kind of sitting on the fence of purchasing a Mavic 3 and wanted that option to have a telephoto lens or multiple telephoto lenses, then of course I would opt to getting this one here versus the original one because of that small price difference. So if you wanted to skip out on those optical tele lenses like you would get here on the Mavic 3 Pro as well as the original Mavic 3, and just wanted to stick with the standard 4/3-inch censored wide angle lens on the Classic, you can definitely save some money here because this thing is $1599, where here on the Mavic 3 Pro, we have $2199, as well as on the original Mavic 3 at $2,049. So it's really up to you as far as which option and which route you want to go, but definitely there is some benefits with having a tele lens. With the addition of those 2 lenses, the 70mm as well as the 166, which is pretty much a 3x and a 7x lens, you're now able to get in a lot tighter on a subject, which of course, if you're looking at focal length, can create a different mood, a different setting, just a different story as far as shooting with a wide lens versus a tele lens. Now, the one thing I was doing with the Mavic 3 is that it does have that tele lens. However, it didn't have that middle ground lens like this one does. So now you're not losing that quality by digitally zooming in. You are now optically zooming in at 1x with the wide angle, 3x with that new 70mm camera, as well as 7x zoom with that 166mm telephoto camera on the top right. The one thing that really impressed me is the high quality you're still able to get at that 166mm. The thing that people don't realize is that when you're zoomed into a subject, when you're using a long telephoto lens, every micro movement you are making on that camera or on that drone resonates, amplifies a lot more in the footage. And being that you're up in the air, this thing's moving around, shaking, I am just blown away of how stable the footage still looks when zoomed in on that 7x zoom, as well as even when you're zoomed in digitally at 28x. Now, those 3 cameras do provide you that optical length, but if you did want to digitally zoom in between those ranges, you are able to do that. On the main camera here on the very bottom, you are able to digitally zoom between 1x and 3x. Jumping over to the medium tele camera, you are able to digitally zoom in from 3x to 7x. And then on the longer tele camera, you are able to digitally zoom in from 7x all the way up to 28x. Now, if you already own a Mavic 3 like this one here, the Classic or the Mavic 3 Cine, the size of the Mavic 3 Pro Body-wise is about the same. The thing that is different is that they did have to raise up the front a little bit more to accommodate the larger cameras. When looking from top down on these drones, you can definitely see that the camera is significantly larger. It does come up a little bit more, come out a little bit more than the other cameras. As far as batteries, they are compatible with one another as well as the propellers. I was able to switch out the propellers from the Pro with the original Mavic 3 Cine as well as the Mavic 3 Classic. So batteries and props, you're good there. As far as the main camera goes, we still have that 5.1K at 50 frames a second or up to 50 frames a second, as well as 4K up to 60 frames a second. And if you want a slow motion on the Pro, we still have the 4K 120 as well as 1080p up to 200 frames a second. And moving over to the two tele cameras, we do have up to 4K 60 frames a second. Now going back to the main wide angle camera here at the very bottom, we still have that adjustable aperture f2.8 all the way up to an f11. And when it comes to photos, we do have 20 megapixel 12-bit raw photo. And as far as video goes, we still have that 10-bit D-Log as well as a new 10-bit D-Log-M. Now in those log profiles, you do have that ability to have the color assist on. So if you don't like looking at the screen when it's nice and kind of desaturated, you are able to turn on the color assist. The one thing with the D-Log-M, it is a little bit easier to color grade versus the standard D-Log. We still have the HLG HDR video recording on that main camera as well as a night mode, which boosts your ISO in those low light scenarios. Now, if you are wondering about Apple ProRes, they are going to have a Cine version of the Pro, just like they did with the original Mavic 3. That new Mavic 3 Pro Cine version will have the internal 1 terabyte SSD. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do what they did with the Inspire. That would have been really good if they had that detachable SSD drive, so you're able to then pull it out, automatically download it separately and not have to do it from the aircraft itself. But unfortunately, we still have that internal SSD drive here on the Mavic 3 Pro. When it comes down to video transmission, as far as that distance between your remote control and your drone, we're still rated at 15 kilometers, and it is using the DJI O3 Plus or OcuSync 3 Plus transmission on the Mavic 3 Pro. Now, of course, that's what they're rating it for in ideal conditions, direct line of sight. And as far as the live feed coming back, you have the 1080p up to 60 frames a second back to your remote. Now, when it comes to flight time, the Mavic 3 Pro is rated for 43 minutes, a little bit shorter, a few minutes shorter than something like the Mavic 3 and the Mavic 3 Classic, which are rated for 46 minutes. Main difference here, of course, is that we have additional weight from that camera. We're at 958 grams on the Mavic 3 Pro, and on the Mavic 3, we're somewhere around that 895 grams. The one thing that did bum me out about the Mavic 3 Pro, though, is that we still only have 8 gigs internal on their flagship drone. This is something that they definitely could have upped to something at least 32, 64 gigs. I just don't understand why storage is so cheap, why we cannot have larger storage on these platforms. When it comes down to obstacle avoidance or obstacle sensing, we do have the standard sensors here, the omnidirectional sensors on all of their Mavic 3s. We have sensors here on the very top. We have 2 on the rear that point outward. We of course have a couple here on the very bottom, as well as the landing sensors. And we still have the 2 here on the front. Those sensors allow this drone to have the APAS 5.0, which is their advanced pilot assistance system. So if you are flying back and you're going in something like return to home, it is advanced enough to know that if there's something in the way, it'll then, depending on what your settings are, can either stop or go around those objects. More importantly, those sensors allow you to have things like Focustrack, which of course is active track, as well as spotlight and point of interest. The one thing that's great is that you are able to use Focustrack even with the tele cameras. The only function that you can't use is the 7x zoom on the optical lens here on the top right. You're not able to use that in active track. After flying this thing, I have been using that 3x zoom a lot. I think that's more of like that sweet spot to get not only the highest quality, but you also get a little different perspective and compression in your videos. As far as intelligent flight modes on the Pro, of course, we have all the standard ones. We have the master shots, we have quick shots. We also have that cruise control, really good to use, especially when you're using this thing with one of the telephoto lenses. We also have waypoint flights, which was introduced not too long ago on the Classic as well as the other Mavic 3s, as well as the high-speed quick transfer. So if you want to download your footage quickly, we do have that here on the Mavic 3 Pro. Using this dial here on the top allows you to start off with that wide angle 1x lens, that wide angle lens on the very bottom. But then if you are in Explorer mode, you're able to just pull it all the way to the right and it'll zoom all the way in from 1x all the way to 28x. Now the one thing you might see there as you're using Explorer mode is that when it is shifting from one camera to the other, you might see just a touch difference in color shift. Now for me, I wasn't really too concerned about that, mainly because I don't believe I'm going to be using that zoom from 1 to 28 as a piece of footage that I'm gonna be using for an edit or a cut or something like that. For me, when I was flying, I was normally just either shooting wide or I'm shooting at 3x or 7x, but I'm not really fluctuating in there. I'm not really using that digital zoom in between those ranges. Now, when I first saw the Mavic 3 Pro, I did see, of course, this new camera, new lens, and I did see this right here. The front element is able to come off and you are able to put on some filters. Now, DJI does have this set, which is an ND8 all the way up to a 1632 and 64 option here. So if you do want to use the telephoto lenses or even something like the wide angle and you wanted to have the ability to keep that ISO as low as possible, if you don't have something like a filter set and you're trying to shoot wide open, which means you're trying to shoot at like an f2.8, wide open, bright daylight, you're gonna need to crank that shutter up, which means you might see some kind of jitter in your footage because you're shooting at such a higher frame rate. If you wanted to dial that back in and get some natural motion blur, you're going to need a set of ND filters. Now, with that said, we do come down to price. So if you wanted to get the most affordable Mavic 3 Pro setup, you'll be getting the Mavic 3 Pro, as well as this one right here, the DJI RC. This comes in at $21.99 for this setup right here. Now, the next setup we have is the Fly More combo for this setup, which comes in at $29.99. You'll get these two right here, as well as the Fly More, which is 2 extra batteries, the battery hub, as well as a bag. Now, if you wanted to move up to the DJI RC Pro, this setup right here, this will run you $38.89, and you'll get the DJI RC Pro remote, as well as the Mavic 3 Pro, and you will get the Fly More combo. Extra batteries, the hub, the filters, as well as the bag. And just like we had on the original Mavic 3, if you needed something like the Cine version, we do have the Cine version package. All of this in Cine version with the bag, with the Fly More combo, and that comes out to $47.99. So that'll be pretty much the top of the line Mavic 3 Pro that you would get. To be honest, with the original Mavic 3, I didn't use that longer lens, which is pretty much the longer lens that they have here on this one, as much. But I think that 3X that they did offer here now gives you that ability to get that middle ground, but still maintain the highest quality. Again, if you're not into using telephoto lenses, if you don't need them, if you're just a landscape photographer and you're just always shooting wide, then stick with something like this, the Mavic 3 Classic. But if you're the type to want to tell a visually different story and have that option to have and create a little bit more depth of field, a little better parallax movement with a telephoto lens, then you're going to want to jump over to something like this. And because of the fact that it's not that much more, about 150 bucks more than the original Mavic 3, you're just gonna jump straight into the Pro version. I'm of course gonna have a lot more in-depth videos on the Mavic 3 Pro, and I'm also gonna have some comparison videos with the Classic as well as the original Mavic 3. So of course, if you guys wanna see those types of videos, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. And if you guys got value from this video, a big like would be much appreciated. This is also Stasia with FlytPath.com. I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.